When did you find kind of the community of D&D?
Eighth grade, became aware of it, and I went to the club at my school, and they did not want me in there. So I was even turned down by the D&D kids.
Hi, I'm Mayim and Bialik, and welcome to my breakdown. This is the place where we break things down so you don't have to.
It's Mayim and Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you, because you know she knows a thing or two. So now she's gonna break down. So break down. She's gonna break it down.
Today, we're going to be breaking down a lot of things regarding the writer, actor, and comic Brian Posehn. You might know Brian from The Big Bang Theory. He played Bert, the geologist, who my character had some really fun scenes with. We teased him a lot as a geologist on the show. Before we talk more about the things we're going to talk about with Brian Posehn, who's really, really a really fascinating guest, I'd like to introduce you to Jonathan Cohen, the man who makes Neurosis look hot.
Hi, Mayim.
There he goes. How you doing?
Just gathering things to be worried about.
Jonathan, tell people about our website.
Our website is bialikbreakdown.com. That's
BIA.
Oh, who's going first now?
Apparently you.
BIA.
LIK.
Breakdown.com, where you can ask Mayim anything.
Anything?
Anything about mental health and well-being, which pretty much leaves almost nothing off the table. Also, Mayim is very curious, so you can also send us facts and tidbits there, and she might comment on them.
I love to comment on things.
I'm very excited for today's episode.
Yeah, it's a really good one. Brian Posehn is someone that I got to know really only after knowing him for a couple of years. He's very, very shy. He's a very private person. Those kind of people are always very, very interesting to me. And so when he came to work on Big Bang, I wanted to know so many things about him. We quickly discovered that we were both nerds, which is important. I was really the only nerd on the set of The Big Bang Theory until he came along and Kevin Sussman came along. John Ross Bowie's like a different kind of... John Ross Bowie's more of like a geek. He's kind of cooler than me and Kevin and Brian. Anyway, Brian and I ended up participating in a Dungeons and Dragons campaign for several years. I've been part of this game with Eric Kaplan, who's the co-executive producer of Big Bang Theory, and Kevin Sussman and Maria Ferrari, another one of our producers from Big Bang Theory. And we had been playing for several years, kind of an early version of Dungeons and Dragons called GURPS. It's such a long nerdball story. Anyway, we added Brian in the last couple years, and that's when I really got to see a lot of his kind of comedy genius and his playfulness. And we have kids around the same age, and so we would talk about that. And he has a podcast where he just plays D&D. So we actually have a lot in common, and Brian's the kind of guy I would have hung out with in junior high and high school, exactly like he was. Not like, oh, the way he is now is, he's so cool and fun. I mean, like, I really gravitated towards guys like that, really since elementary school. I was friends with a kid who kind of had a very Brian Posehn-ness to him, and those kind of dudes were always very interesting to me. And indeed, Brian has a very, very interesting story. Word of the day.
The word of the day is actually 3 words of the day. They go together. Cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome.
Very good. Cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome.
Say it 3 times fast.
Cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome.
Still doesn't get clear. Keep going, though. Tell us what it means.
This is a good word of the day because one of the things we're going to talk about with Brian is...
cannabis use.
And especially how the use of pot as self-medication has pros and it has cons. And especially in this last year, exactly the time that you and I formulated this podcast, a lot of people have been struggling with ways to make themselves feel better, especially in the absence of a lot of the outlets that we usually, have been able to have. And pot use and drinking has absolutely increased. I mean, I think just anecdotally, from the people that I know, that's absolutely true. Cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome it's not a typical syndrome. Of all the people who show up in emergency rooms with copious vomiting, which is what hyperemesis is. And I think I'm pronouncing it right. I mean, we could both be wrong. About 6%, it's due to repeated pot use. Pot, which is actually used to stop nausea, especially from chemotherapy. In some people, it builds up in their system so that they have copious vomiting and abdominal pain. It can lead to significant kidney problems. Now, this is not a word of the day so that I scare people from smoking pot. I just think that it's a beautiful example of how complicated the body is, and how certain bodies will not react well to chronic use of pot. And by the same token, some people smoke pot and there's, never show up with this kind of thing. But I think what's interesting is that hot showers often make it better. The way that you actually make it go away is to stop smoking and let it literally kind of leave your body. But probably the most fascinating statistic, which may not even exist for our word of the day, is that most people will go back to smoking pot, even after having this kind of
If you experience it once, does that make you more likely or
That's a great question. I actually don't know the answer to that, but I think it's very similar, and then we'll stop talking about depressing things. It's very similar to, people who end up in the hospital for alcohol poisoning or people who OD and end up in the hospital and get another chance at life. That's often not people's bottom. We don't get to decide what someone's bottom. I would think if I ended up in the hospital retching for days and losing weight and constantly vomiting with crippling pain, I'd be like, this is not for me. No, thank you, universe.
Maybe try a different strain.
Try a different strain, Jonathan. It's really a pleasure to welcome Brian to Mayim Bialik's Breakdown. There's so many things that I want to talk to him about. I want to talk to him about Dungeons and Dragons. I want to talk to him about, how he got to be the Brian that he is. I do want to know when he got that tall. Was he 10 and that tall? Was he a giant toddler? I want to know. We're going to ask him.
We're going to find out.
And we're also going to ask him, he has been very public about his pot use. That is one of the things that he has been public about. And I believe, it was in some of the research that our intern did, that he publicly quit smoking. So I'm actually curious about that. So let's bring on my friend, the wonderful Brian Posehn.
Break it down.
Hello, Brian Posehn.
Hey, how are you?
Okay, thank you so much for tolerating me in this space. You tolerate me in a lot of spaces. You tolerated me on Big Bang for years.
Uh-huh.
You tolerate me when we play D&D with Eric Kaplan and all of our nerd friends.
I enjoy your company. What's not to enjoy?
Okay. Well, thank you for being here. I'm going to embarrass you and make my way through your bio because there are people who may know certain things about you, but not all. You're not only an actor, you're a writer, and you're a stand-up comic. And did stand-up comedy come first?
Yeah. That's what I've been doing the longest. And that's why I moved to Los Angeles and,
When did you start doing that?
1987. I was 21 years old.
Okay, got it. Okay.
It was when I could get into a comedy club legally. I'd been preparing. I decided to do it when I was going to college. I was around 20. I decided I'm going to do it, started writing jokes, and then checked in with these comedy clubs and got in. The week I turned 21, I started telling jokes on stage.
Just 5 years ago. Just five short years ago.
Yeah.
So you had obviously a recurring role on Big Bang Theory, which is where I got to meet you. You were also, the first place I ever saw you was on the Comedy Central Sarah Silverman program. You were absolutely hilarious. And I remember that's actually you're one of those presences that I instantly liked you. I instantly wanted to know who's this, just your voice, the way you held yourself. I loved you on that. Well, so you have a podcast.
Yes.
And you're also involved in Deadpool, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so tell us about both of those things.
Well, separately.
Separately, yes.
Deadpool I wrote for about 3.5 years. We did 45 issues, myself and Jerry Duggan, who now is a Marvel writer on his own. But he was a pal of mine, and we wrote a thing called Last Christmas for Image Comics. And then just became friends with guys at Marvel. Comic-Con, that's my real thing. I am an actual nerd. when I first got to Big Bang, I had to ask around and find who the real nerds were.
You
And I
found us.
gravitated toward you. But yeah, that's my favorite thing. Comic-Con was my Christmas till COVID made it go away. But I wound up meeting these Marvel guys, and then we pitched. There was a space in Deadpool, and they needed some writers, and we pitched a whole year, and next thing we knew, we did 3.5 years. But
Wow. And your podcast, tell us about that.
been doing that a while. Nerd Poker first started like in the first wave of podcasts. Maybe we're a year or two behind everybody else, but I've done it for a long time. And it's basically we just play. When people came to me and said, "Hey, do you want to do a podcast?" I didn't want to interview my friends and do like the thing Mark Maron and those guys were doing. I just wanted to play D&D basically. So that's what it is. We just record. I've had a weekly game going for almost 15 years now with this group of friends, and that became the show.
Is it poker or is it D&D?
It's D&D, but I call it Nerd Poker because to me, the attraction to D&D is being with your friends, and
Right.
it's less about the game and more about this weekly thing with this pod of people that really know you and they get you, and and we can be ourselves.
Tell us a little bit about young Brian. Tell us like where you're from and, thumbnail sketch of like, what'd your folks do? How were you raised? Did you have siblings? Like, who was young Brian?
Mostly raised by a single mom. My dad died when I was 2. Raised in Northern California. Grew up near Stanford, and then moved to San Jose and Sonoma.
The Ho, as we call it. I have family in San Jose. We call it the Ho.
Oh, nice. Yes. Lived in San Jose till I was 9. Don't remember too much about it, and then moved.
It's the same. It hasn't changed since like 1972.
And then Sonoma was this little, tourist town that wasn't fun to grow up in as the weird kid. I'd just gotten glasses when I moved up there. I had been, so I had a vision problem that was diagnosed and hadn't been before, and so now I had that thing, and immediately got made fun of, and just it wasn't a great experience. But that I think it had a big part of why I do comedy.
Did you have siblings?
No,
Just you and your mom.
mm-hmm.
Was your mom a creative type?
Not really. No, she was a social worker and was really good at that. She worked with developmentally disabled kids up at the state hospital up there in Sonoma. When after my dad died, she put herself through college. She went to San Jose State. That's why we were there.
Amazing.
And then by the time I turned 8 or 9, she started looking for jobs at different state hospitals around California, and then we moved up there.
Was your dad a creative type?
Yeah, he was, or he had a regular job, but he was really into stand-up. He died young. I mean, he died at 24, 25, so
God.
he didn't get to really do what he wanted to do, but he was, I took some cues from him. I went to the same junior college as he did up in Sacramento,
Wow.
and he was into theater and comedy, and I think he might have tried comedy if he had been able to, live long enough.
Right. So let's talk about the fact that you're quite tall.
Yes.
I did a little research. You're in the top 1% of height, making only 0.048% of men in the United States taller than you.
Mm-hmm.
You're very tall. How tall are you, Brian?
Does it say how we die first too? The big
Stop
guys?
it. No, how tall are you?
6'6".
Like you could be a basketball player.
Sure, if I was given coordination also, along with my freakish height.
I want to know how long you've been this tall. Like when did you hit this height?
Oh, well, yeah, that's a good story, actually.
Go ahead and tell it.
I grew 8 inches in 1 year. And
No, you didn't.
It was terrible. It was super painful. And
What year was it? Was it like 30?
18, 19.
Wow. So wait,
After high school.
That's,
yeah.
So you were just like 5'10". You were that dude.
5'10" in high school. And then within 1 year,
Was it a surprise to everyone?
To get to 5'10" was not without pain. I had had growing pains, literal growing pains but when that 1 year, I mean, I could feel like my arms and legs stretching, and
I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but that's
like
intense.
out of a horror movie. It was. I'd wake up just going no, and my arms just growing.
So that's a lot. Like that's into like I need to find clothing that fits me because you're very tall.
Yeah.
You do not fit a twin or full bed.
No. I was already out of a twin at 5'10", but
right.
Then, yeah. And my mom and I didn't have a ton of money, so I was always hanging out of, whatever,
Sure.
And then growing too quickly through clothing and her not being able to,
No, that's just like wear a potato sack till you're done. Just wake me when you're done.
Pretty much.
Wow.
And we thought at 5'10" that I was like, oh, I guess this is it. My dad was 6'8".
Oh, your dad was 6'8"?
Yeah, and my mom is 6 feet even. They met in
Okay,
a tall club, which is
you know
also
what?
interesting.
It doesn't take a neuroscientist. You were going to be taller than 5'10".
Right. But my mom and I weren't convinced when I was, it seemed like I leveled out. And then just
well, by 18, you usually are. It's not unusual to. Jonathan, you are a giant in the Jewish world. Talk about when you became as tall as you are.
So I thought I had a good story that I grew 3/4 of an inch between 21 and 22.
Oh wow,
that doesn't clear. I thought I was totally done, but I think the most frightening part of that would be like 18 to 19. You grow 8 inches, and you're like, what is 19 to 20 gonna be like?
Oh, I know. Well, I think once I got to 6'6", we were like, this feels...
feels about good.
Yeah.
Okay, so I do have a question, though, in terms of, like, weight distribution. So you have to put on weight when you're that much taller. Like were you a lanky 5'10", or were you always, like, a Zaftig kind of...
Well, now I'm big, but I was made fun of for being skinny. I was, yeah. Oh, yeah. Kids, that was the thing. Like, I couldn't put weight on. I had weenie arms and I was, skinny legs and the whole deal.
Wow.
My ribs were always showing.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so then obviously once you grow, like you got like, oh, I have a different body type now is what you had to reckon with. Like,
but even though still in my 20s I was skinny, forever I thought I would just be skinny, and then my body told me in my 30s and 40s that no, dude, there's effects to just eating whatever the hell you want.
As John Ross Bowie says, eating like it's your fucking 12th birthday. That'll do it.
Yeah. Well, especially as a comic and just being up late, I ate a lot of junk food and a lot of diner food. And then eventually my body was like, nope, this is what's going to happen. You're not going to be skinny for the rest of your life.
Okay, that's a fascinating story. This might sound like a silly question. Were you dating anyone at the time? Like, was someone dating 5'10" Brian and then they were dating 6'6" Brian?
No, Brian might not have ever met girls if he hadn't started doing stand-up comedy. Like, I'm a total late bloomer. 21 was when I first, and I didn't even have a girlfriend until I was 24 probably.
Right. No judgment here. I'm a super late bloomer.
I liked girls. They just didn't like me.
Well,
And I always went for the wrong ones. I always went for the cheerleaders, and then I'd find out later the nerdy girl kind of liked me, and I was like, God damn it,
What was it like being different? Because, many of us are different in different ways. You had a real, especially having that height, kind of coming into your own as a young man. What was that like? Was it depressing? Was it isolating? Did you turn it into a reason to have a sense of humor? Did you experience depression? Like, did it feel lonely? Like, what was it like to be you?
Well, my humor, I think, came from loss. I think it came from losing my dad and then losing my favorite grandmother in high school. And it just, it became like gallows humor was the first thing I was, that appealed to me was, making fun of a shitty situation. That came from that. And as far as like kids being made fun of, like I learned kind of not to fight back because when I did, I would get into worse trouble because my mouth was I was always a little bit smarter than the kid that was making fun of me. And when I pointed that out, it never went well. And, like the first kind of things I got picked on at my new school were I felt were on me. Like it was me being like, I bragged to these kids that I had won the reading contest at the town library over the summer. I thought that was the way you met friends, by going, hey, I got free ice cream because I read more books than any of you idiots. And maybe I didn't say it like that, but things like that where I was like, oh, maybe I'm the problem. When I would get beaten up, it was like, oh, maybe I should have shut the fuck up. And so it was that, it was not fun until junior, senior year. I have such a 80s movie transformation where I was like Lucas. I was the nerdy kid, and then met a friend of mine who's lifelong Navy guy since then, but he was the cool guy at school. He was on the wrestling team, and we met at summer school and bonded over Pink Floyd. And then suddenly he was bringing me to the parties, and we were, doing music at school and playing. We were DJs during lunch and everything. And that turned everything around for me. It didn't get girls to go out with me, but it got them to know my name and be a little more accepting. And then guys weren't punching me anymore because my friend was going to punch them back.
So was music a source of comfort for you and identity?
A lot of escapism, a lot of because my mom and I didn't really get along either. So there was a lot of reading. I became a huge Stephen King fan, comic books, horror movies for life, heavy metal. I got into Kiss at 9 and 10. And then from Kiss, it was I want something harder, faster, whatever it was. And I got lucky in the early 80s, music was changing so much. So I got into heavy metal on the ground floor as it kind of became mainstream.
Did you, I was a late bloomer in many, many aspects. I didn't drink literally until I was 21. I was in Paris once where I was allowed to drink, but it was with my parents. I don't even know if that counts. Did you experiment with drugs? Was that also part of your, did that feel good?
I drank, but no, I didn't smoke pot till my 20s.
And what was drinking like? Did it, were you aware, oh, this is just I like drinking and whatever? Or did you identify any component of oh, I like myself better when I'm like this?
I was a little more fun when I had a couple of beers in me, and I kind of leaned into that at a certain point. Where it's oh, I'm that guy now. Oh, I'm the crazy guy. I'll jump out of a tree if I have a 6-pack of Mickey's Big Mouths, and then I'll do something stupid and entertain my friends. There's a little bit of that.
Sure.
Not as sad as it sounds saying it out loud.
I think it sounds like a hoot. I got no problem. No judgment here. So when did you find kind of the community of D&D? All the things you listed are sort of the precursors, to, comic books and things like that. That's, kind of the world that many of us resonate in.
I even have a funny story with D&D. So I was 8th grade, became aware of it, and was oh, this seems like something I would really like. And I went to the club at my school, and they did not want me in there. So I was even turned down by the D&D kids.
What'd they say?
No, I walked in, and this one kid, who I won't say his name, but just saw me and went, Posehn, what are you doing here? And I'm just yeah, you're right. Yeah, I don't know. And turned around and didn't play D&D really till my 20s. And then and that even I got into a weird way. I was working at a record store with a guy, and the guy's hey, this buddy of mine, we play D&D, and it's just the two of them. And I was that seems weird. I had, heard it was more social than that, but they had this kind of sad 2-person D&D game, and I got to come over one night, and they made it I had been. D&D was, growing up in the 70s. My mom was Christian, but not crazy Christian, and there was always the hey, Kiss will make you, turn you on to Satan.
Sure.
Dungeons and Dragons will turn you on to Satan. All these, Satan was just waiting in all these
He's
different
just
things.
hovering.
Yeah, just hanging out in a movie you might like, and then next thing you know, you're satanic.
Oh, you're enjoying something? That's Satan.
But so I was kind of scared off by it. And then when in my 20s, working at the record store, I go to my friend Rick's house. He actually plays Slayer. We're smoking pot, and they actually felt satanic. And I was like, I kind of like this stuff. But when we play D&D now, it's way less satanic.
Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is brought to you by Apostrophe, a prescription skincare company for people that are ready to take their acne seriously.
Prescription acne treatment really works, but it's hard to get because in order to see a doctor, you usually have to take off time from work. You have to sit in line at the pharmacy if they even can figure out which medication you need until Apostrophe. Apostrophe makes it easy to see a board-certified dermatologist online. It's amazing. You get treated immediately. Your medications are delivered to your home. You just fill out their online questionnaire all about your skin concerns and your medical history. Then you snap a few selfies. That was fun when I did it. And your dermatologist will get back to you with a customized treatment plan tailored just for you. The best part is they have both topical and oral medications, so you can treat your acne from the inside out and the outside in. Apostrophe treats acne, but you're thinking, Mayim, you don't have acne. No, I don't, but I have other skincare goals that Apostrophe is helping me treat. Reducing redness, this is a thing that I've been battling for years. Wrinkles, me, I don't have any. Just kidding, yes, I do. They even help with dark spots. I've got those too. I love that Apostrophe allows you to not leave your home and get the care that you need for your skin. This is one of those specialty things, like going to a dermatologist, that many people don't do because it's so hard, and Apostrophe makes it so easy. I actually really liked the quiz. It was kind of fun because they asked all sorts of questions about do I spend time outside, and what is my skin used to, and things like that. Anyway, get $15 off your first visit with a board-certified dermatologist at apostrophe.com/breakdown. Use our code BREAKDOWN. This code is only available for our listeners. To get started, go to apostrophe.com/breakdown, click begin visit, then use the code BREAKDOWN at sign up, and you will get $15 off your dermatology visit. That's apostrophe.com/breakdown. Use the code BREAKDOWN, get your dermatology visit for $15 off. Thank you, Apostrophe, for sponsoring the podcast and saving my skin.
This episode of Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is brought to you by BetterHelp Online Counseling.
If you're feeling depressed, if you're struggling with relationships, maybe you're having difficulty sleeping or meeting your goals, BetterHelp offers online professional counselors who can listen and help.
BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. You can start communicating in under 48 hours. It is not a crisis line. It's not a self-help line. It is professional counseling done securely online. There's a broad range of expertise available, which may not be locally available in many areas.
You can log into your account anytime. You can send a message to your counselor anytime. You get timely and thoughtful responses, and you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions. You won't ever have to sit in a waiting room like you do with traditional therapy. Jonathan and I both talk a lot about our personal experience with therapy and how critically important it is to make that decision to treat yourself better. BetterHelp is a great way to start. They're committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches. They make it easy and free to change counselors if you need to. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is also available. So many people have been using BetterHelp. They are recruiting additional counselors in all 50 states.
And our listeners get 10% off their first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/break. Visit betterhelp.com/break and join the over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced BetterHelp professional.
You know, my brother played D&D. He was 4 years older than me, and it was always the thing I wasn't allowed to touch. I wasn't allowed to do. There's a lot of precision. There's a lot of OCD friendly things about D&D. You know, there's a lot of rules, I mean, back in the day, and I guess still now, we used, printed out sheets, and my brother used to, give me like a blank one that I could just like play with. But there was this real magic, to that piece of paper, that character sheet,
Absolutely.
And they used to play at like lunchtime, at the benches when I was a kid, but I was never really allowed to play. And I dated someone for the better part of 5 years who was a total D&D. Like, I think he had played for like 38 years, like something ridiculous. And so I started playing. What I realized is that it's a lot of the thinking patterns required for the kind of people I tend to like to hang out with. And, when Big Bang Theory was taken to Comic-Con, and, it was like Kaylee and Kunal were warning me, like, there's a lot of really interesting people there. Just like, I'm warning you. It's a very interesting place. And I got there and I was like, there's nothing alarming at all about anything happening here. Like, I grew up in comic book stores and record stores, like waiting for my dad and brother and just like leafing through. Like, those were my people.
Had you never been to a con, though?
I had never been to a convention. And I mean, I just wanted to like walk the vendor aisles. Like, that's what I wanted to do. And I remember the fascination with dice, with D&D dice, had never left me, because that's what I wanted, like, from my brother's set. So as an adult, it was very liberating to get to finally play D&D. And then I started playing with Eric Kaplan, who is one of the co-EPs on Big Bang Theory, who really is, kind of my real life counterpart, in the writer's room from all my years on Big Bang. And we ended up adding you after a couple years that we had been playing. And so we've gotten to play together. But what I thought we would do just for kicks is I have some stats on D&D, and I want to see how many we can conquer together.
Just
Okay.
so you know,
Yes.
I was so happy when you guys invited me, because I was aware of your game and was like, that would be fun. I hope I get to know them well enough to where they asked me to play.
We have a super good time.
Yeah.
The early years were a whole learning curve, which I'm glad you missed out.
You had the cool kids game, it sounds like.
We did have the cool kids game, but it's like also, I mean, I was talking to you about this the other day, and this might come up again. Like, I don't feel significantly different as an adult than I did as a, awkward, kid who was in chess club, the only girl in chess club. Like, that's essentially still who I am. Like, you dress it up different, but like, that's the core of who I am, is I want to hang out with those kind of people. Okay, this is a fun little game. And okay, the average D&D game includes how many players? Like, just average.
4.
Okay, 5.
Okay.
How many campaigns do you think there are worldwide at any given time?
Wow.
It's in the millions.
Yeah, I'm not even aware how many people play.
I know.
Really. I know it's way more popular now than it ever has been.
Well, that's a stat we're going to get to. It says there are an estimated 3 million campaigns worldwide.
Wow. Yeah.
The game is most popular in 3 English-speaking countries. What are the 3 English-speaking countries where the game is most popular?
Yeah, I was going to say Canada.
Canada is the number 1, yes.
Oh, wow. Number 1, even more
number
than the
1.
United States.
That's number 2. And what's number 3?
Somewhere Scandinavian,
So
maybe?
it's interesting. Australia.
Oh, okay.
I mean, so anyway, the game is most popular. Canada, the U.S., and Australia. The popularity of the game, it says, began declining in 2004. It hit a low in 2012, but then 5th edition came out in 2014, and now it's been steadily increasing. This is a really interesting stat. Based on the data sample from this research that our intern helped us do, 40% of chosen characters fall into, quote, standard Tolkien-based fantasy characters. Your dwarves, your elves, your humans.
Sure.
What's the most popular class?
Rogue.
Fighter.
Yeah.
Okay. The least popular is what I usually like to play. I had no idea.
Cleric?
Bard.
Oh, Bard. Yeah.
A bard. Yeah. 40% of current players are younger than 25. What percent of current players are 40 or older? What percent of players are 40 or older?
God, I don't know. 15?
11.
Oh, okay.
We give points for being anywhere near the answer.
That's pretty good. What percentage of the player base identifies as female? This actually shocked me.
Is it more?
It's not
Is it
more
more
than 50%.
It's not more than 50%?
No.
Oh, okay. 35.
39%. Very good. The game has been used in psychotherapeutic treatment.
This was interesting. I didn't know.
Its ability to create structured social engagement has been found to be helpful, especially in children with autism, because of the formation of shared community, the practice of empathy, and creative engagement. I found that really, really interesting because...
That makes sense, though.
Right. Well, and I think that's kind of what I wanted to, to poke at a little bit. I'm an introvert, who lives my life as an extrovert. But in general, if you look at, kind of the classification of introverts versus extroverts, introverts are people who feel tapped out by interacting with other people socially. And extroverts are people who really thrive on that kind of interaction. And I didn't even really think much about this until, a handful of years ago, someone said something about like how excited they were to like go to a large event. And I was thinking, what? There's people who like actively want to do that. And especially this past year, I've heard people saying like, gosh, I miss people so much. And I'm like, no, I like, there are certain people that I like, but what I've found is that for me, D&D is a really safe place to socialize. I never liked going to bars. I never really was a party person. But the thing about D&D is I do get to interact with people who are interested at the level that I'm interested at understanding the world at. It's an incredibly important social outlet. And I remember, Brian, like, in the time that I got to work with you, we often barely spoke words to each other. And I remember I'm very drawn, and this is like the topic of a whole other episode, I'm very drawn to people who are hard to draw out. And I'm sure it's like, it's dad issues. And I wasn't sure if maybe you didn't like me because, like, I think I remember I totally fangirled out on you, when I first met you. I was like, I am a huge fan. Like, I loved you on Sarah Silverman, and I just think you're amazing. And, but I realized, like, you're a very private person. You're a very quiet person. And then when I found out you did stand-up, I was like, he gives himself to audiences. Why can't he give himself to me? But I was so interested in how much fun we do get to have in a group setting, like when we play. And I wonder sort of what your experience of that is with meeting people and having to socialize and what that feels like. Do you identify as someone who is socially anxious? Do you just like to be quiet? Like, talk about it.
When I first got to Big Bang, the whole thing was like fly under the radar, like be funny.
Yep.
Be on time. You know what I mean? Give 100%. When you're a guest on a show that's already established, I'd had some weird experiences. I'd had some shows where not everybody was cool and everybody was at your show. But it took me a while to come out.
Some of us are cooler than others, though,
It took me a while to come out of my shell. I mean, it's still, that's been a big thing for me my whole life is to, like, do I feel comfortable around people enough to start to make jokes? Because that didn't always fly. And so, like, some people go, you're dark or you're weird. And then so, like, you hear that enough, you're just like, okay, well, I'll just keep that shit to myself and just get through this. So there was a little bit of that. And then, so then once I realized I was kind of the family is when I got more comfortable there. Once I kept coming back and, it's like, maybe the 6th or 8th episode, I started to go, okay, well, they don't hate me here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the story I tell about my time on Big Bang, because I started as a guest star. I was a guest star, possible recurring, and then they brought me and Melissa back, throughout, kind of season 4, and they had started bringing her back in season 3 before I even came on. I was just like pinned for episodes, here and there. I wasn't a regular for most of season 4. And there was some episode, I don't even remember what it was. And I remember I came home on a Friday because we would rehearse Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And I called my manager and it was like kind of out of the blue. I just said like, I think this is probably my last episode. Like, I feel like they're just kind of like done, like, I don't really know. I'm doing my best and like, it's funny, but I think this is it. And she's like, oh, you never know. And literally that day, before end of day, we got a call that they were offering me to be a regular. And I thought, Well, I clearly have no idea. I can't read anything. I completely, and that's about how clueless I feel in a lot of realms of my life. But it can be a very hard read, especially when you're joining something. I likened joining, and I'm sure you felt this way too, as like, joining the last year of high school in like the last semester, 2 weeks in, when everybody's got their locker and their alliances. And
I felt even more out of place. It was so funny to be on a show about nerds where I felt like the biggest nerd there, where I would walk in and go, God, these guys are so fucking cool compared to me.
that's honestly, like, that's exactly what it was like before you came along and before Kevin, was more of a presence. And even John Ross Bowie, like he and I had stuff to talk about, like.
Well, those guys I bonded with immediately. Like
Totally.
the other guest guys, when I would see them, it would be like, oh my God, how are you? Like, so good to see you. And I have something in common and,
Well, and I think also that's sort of the aspect of like what I was like when I felt out of it and too nerdy and too whatever, that doesn't really go away. And there are people who seem to have a sense of confidence. I just hadn't acquired it. It's not what I was born to acquire. So for me, like, those really were the cool kids. And I've known Johnny Galecki since I'm 13 years old. Like, we knew each other. We used to hang out. And he was always like that cool guy. Yeah, but also like he wore fancy scarves and like leather shoes with no laces and no socks. And I was like, he walked out of a magazine and Kaylee was on the cover of Cosmo. No, but I think it was really, really nice. And, for me as a female, I oftentimes find more men to bond with in this arena than women. And I remember whenever interviewers would ask us, like, who's a geek here? And, God bless, Melissa would be like, I'm a theater geek. Does that count? It's
right.
Like, if you don't have a collection of dice, no, it doesn't count.
No, I remember straight up just asking guys, like on the set, like, hey, are you guys actually into this? And they were all like, nope.
Yeah, they're really not.
Stars.
I would hang out in the comic book store set.
Yeah, me
like,
too. I was on the set, like holding up DC Comics going, oh, clearly they, because it's Warner Brothers, but no Marvel allowed. And no one wanted to talk about that.
Right, exactly.
I could have talked hours.
No, and whenever I would give people the tour of our set, like, my favorite place to take them was my favorite room, which was like the production set design office. Because we had like every DC expensive, like the figurines that cost $1,500 at the comic book store. We were like, we had them by the dozen. It was insane.
That would have been a podcast just talking about the set design and hanging out in the comic book store.
Oh, so much fun. Well, we missed that iteration. Have you ever been in therapy? Is it something you've partaken?
Yeah, well, so basically my therapist, I've had one in LA, the same one the whole time I've been here. And the whole time she's just been telling me that I've been holding on to old shit and that I'm cooler than I think. And, that's like the biggest thing, and my wife too, it's like, no, you're not that geek. And I am geeky about things, but it's really about these old feelings of, and it was other kids calling me names. And finally, nerd became empowering in the 90s, but for a long time it wasn't. It was the bad word that I had heard I'd never even heard it till Happy Days, and then kids called me it at school.
When did you start going to therapy? I'm trying to do the math of how long you've been in LA.
Well, no, I went to play therapy as a kid after having my dad die, and I had some issues at school. So I went. I'd like to say my mom started me, if I was in San Jose, I probably started seeing one around 4 or 5.
Do you remember anything of what play therapy was like?
No, I just remember getting on the floor with this cool British guy, and he had all these models of ships. He had a Queen Mary model, and he was just into that. I remember him being into ships, and I remember just playtime, sitting on this comfortable rug and just talking to him and playing with toys, and he would talk to me about how I was feeling and things like that. I remember that. I remember knowing that he wasn't really my pal, but it felt like he was. You know what I mean? And it was like a doctor, but not really. I remember that feeling. And then high school, my mom and I really didn't get along, so we went to we had whatever you call it, parent and kid therapy. We went together, and then I saw that therapist alone through high school too. So just we'd have sessions with my mom, and then we'd have sessions in Santa Rosa by myself, and then we'd, drive home and I'd get yelled at.
What was the basis of your not getting along with her? Like, I mean, just generally speaking.
It never got worked out. My mom passed away last year, and we never really worked our shit out.
I mean, were you just like very, very different? Did she want you to do things a certain way, or were you like playing your music too loud?
No, it was a little bit being raised by a kid is the way my current therapist words it. My mom was a really smart lady, but then wasn't able to really talk to me in the right way, or so there was a lot of resentment and a lot of teen anger that still
It hangs on, doesn't it?
Yes.
So as an adult, are you like a classical psychotherapy person? Do you do cognitive behavioral therapy? Like, do you do anything hippy dippy and way out there like I've tried?
Not really. My therapist is pretty down the middle. She's tried a couple of things where they didn't fly with me, with things that you might call hippy dippy. What
was it? I want to know.
Like just kind of role playing things, or not role playing, role playing, but just forcing me to do something different than just talk about things. I mean, what I liked about it the most was, and I don't currently go right now, but I was going before COVID, and we've done some phoners, but I feel like, and for me, the biggest thing was stand up, and I needed her to get through, when I didn't want to go out, and going back to COVID, like, this is kind of a great thing for me, staying home. Like when you were talking earlier about being an introvert, I definitely am. And I maybe should have never been a stand-up comic because I only really like the joke part. I like writing jokes, and I like telling them to certain people, but I don't like all the people in my audience. Like I look at an audience, and I can count who I wouldn't hang out with, and it's just and it's a lot of stress involved. I used to hate flying, and so I was using therapy mostly to like build myself up to like, okay, you got to do this thing that you hate this week, and I talked to her about that, and a lot of the stuff we talked about was still mom issues,
How a shy, introverted kid gets into stand-up is dealing with not wanting to go, getting support from a therapist. Like, how does that change you to start, being successful at stand-up? And do you ever feel more comfortable on stage? Like, when does that start to happen for you?
Well, no, I mean, I don't think I ever got comfortable on stage. I can do it. I mean, and I know that I can do it, and so I do it, and but it wasn't something that I loved, and it's complex. I hate sounding like I don't like my job, but my job of stand-up creates a lot of stress. It's a complex thing. I love it. I'm good at it. I mean, I at least feel like I don't think I'm a shitty comic. That would be bad. But it's really nerve-wracking doing it. Does that make sense?
Well, it 100% makes sense. And I just like, because you're successful, because you're good at it, and I'm a fan of your stand-up, like there's a part of me that's just wondering, does it ever go like, can you flip that switch and be like, yes, I have all these feelings. Yes, it's really uncomfortable. Yes, I don't want to do this. But like, is there that part of you that you're connected to that's like, but I go up and it usually works out pretty well. Yeah. To like help you like bridge through that moment. Because it's like, we talk about this on the podcast, like our feelings are temporary, even though they feel so immediate.
It's not that I'm nervous about eating it, because I have more confidence than that. I know that I can do it. I think the stress comes from the other stuff. It comes from the being away from my family, being away from my dogs, just being, and being social when I don't want to be. Yeah. And then pot helps that actually, because you meet a stoner after a show and you start smoking pot with them. You don't have to talk to them really.
It's something to do. It's like, yeah.
All right,
share.
so hold on, both of you.
You know,
Hang
there's
on a
little bit of-
second.
Does it change for you then if you're in like a local show? Is it significantly less anxiety provoking if you
It
take away
depends. So yes, it's still all about how I feel because I don't feel comfortable at certain places. The Comedy Store, I've never felt comfortable. So even though I'm at the level I'm at, and I've had people go, "Hey, how come you don't do sets at the store?" And then I'll go do a set at the store, and then I'll remember why. Because it's not fun for me. I hate knowing that it's on my calendar that I have to be there. It's a stressful event and it's not worth, because you don't really get paid when you do the sets in LA. So financially, it's not worth anything. And then I don't get a spark out of making that audience like me. But the improv, I don't mind going, but there's still a little battle of like leaving the valley. I live in Encino, and I like my house and I like my space, and there's a little bit of that of like not wanting to leave.
This episode of Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is brought to you by Hint Water.
How much water do you drink in a day, Jonathan? I'm going to tell you, not enough. Do you know how many ounces you're supposed to drink a day?
More than I drink?
Yes, 64 ounces. That's 8-ounce glasses. For most people, that is not easy to do, mostly because, no insult to water, it's tasteless and boring. Enter Hint Water. Hint Water makes it so easy to consume the amount of water you're supposed to. Also, it tastes great. It's easy to consume the recommended amount of water every day. It is pure water infused with fruit essences that create, favorite phrase, surprisingly accurate fruit flavors. They are surprisingly accurate. There's no sugar, there's no diet sweeteners, there's no calories. It's available in more than 25 flavors. I didn't even know there were 25 flavors. I'm a fan of anything that involves blueberry and lemon, and they are in one bottle of Hint Water. Jonathan, what do you like?
Watermelon every time. That's my favorite. No variation. I like the other flavors, but watermelon is by hands down my favorite.
We import you from snowy Canada so that you can enjoy watermelon. It's like always summer in your head. It's water with a touch of true fruit flavor. You can find Hint Water at retail stores across the U.S., or you can have it delivered directly to your door when you order at hintwater.com. Get a free case. That's 12 16-ounce bottles. Do the math, how long that'll last you, and then triple it. When you buy 2 cases of Hint Water, you get a free case. Shipping's free. Enter the code BREAK at checkout.
This episode of Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is brought to you by Ritual.
We deserve to know what we're putting in our bodies and why, especially when it comes to something that we're taking every day. Ritual's clean, vegan-friendly multivitamin is formulated with high-quality nutrients in forms your body can actually use. That's called bioavailable forms. What you won't find is sugars, GMOs, allergens, synthetic fillers, and artificial colorants. Plus, the fresh taste and delayed-release capsule design make taking your vitamins easy. I love taking Ritual because so many products out there are not bioavailable forms of the things that you need. And people take them and think like, oh, I'm doing a great thing for my body. But Ritual, they've actually figured out how to make these nutrients in the best form that your body can use them in. It is also traceable. You always know what nutrients you're taking and where they come from, thanks to Ritual's one-of-a-kind visible supply chain. Ritual is designed with your life stage in mind, now available for women, men, and teens. Ritual multivitamins are scientifically developed to help support different life stages.
Get key ingredients without the BS. Ritual is offering our listeners 10% off during your first 3 months. Visit ritual.com/breakdown to start your ritual today. This episode of Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is brought to you by Whoop.
One of the things we talk about most is knowing yourself. And we talk about it in a lot of ways. We talk about it in terms of knowing yourself emotionally and knowing yourself psychologically. But it's also important to know your body and to listen to your body and build a strong relationship between your body and your mind That's why we're excited to tell you about Whoop, which is a fitness tracker designed specifically to help you know yourself better so you can build healthier habits. Whoop provides personalized insight into how recovered your body is after a workout, how much stress you're taking on during the day and in training, and it lets you know how well you sleep. So it's like having a personal trainer that lets you know what your body can handle, how hard to push, and how much sleep that you need in order to recover.
Whoop has a built-in journal feature where you can track behaviors you do, such as meditation, taking CBD, log if you're stressed, and you'll get a report every month that shows you how these modalities impact your recovery and your sleep. You can get all this great insight for less than $30 a month.
I love the notion that this is kind of taking your fitness and your body and your awareness of your body to the next level, because it's not enough to say, oh, I burned this many calories, or oh, I did this. But to be able to start making those connections really is the foundation of making larger connections between your behavior and the results you're seeing.
And it doesn't matter the fitness level. You can be a beginner, you can be an expert. Understanding how your body breaks down and recovers is so key to building smarter habits.
For all of our listeners today, if you've been thinking about giving Whoop a shot, there's no better time. You can save 15% off a Whoop with the code BREAKDOWN. Go to Whoop, WHOOP.com, use code BREAKDOWN at checkout, and save yourself 15% off today. Let's take someone who, let's say, is not an alcoholic or doesn't have a problem with drinking, right? Many people have that experience of when I have a glass of wine, it's easier to, fill in the blank. It's easier to go on a date. It's easier to flirt with someone. It's easier to go into a meeting, whatever it is. Alcohol, it's a social lubricant, and for some people that becomes the crutch, which then takes their life down an entirely different path. I think the same can be true of pot as well. It's a bridge to removing that veil of inhibition, which some of us have more of than other people, right?
Right.
Is that what you feel pot is? Is it that bridge between sort of like a more comfortable version of you and you?
Yeah, it is, but then also it dulls you, and which is another thing. That's the negative thing, but sometimes that's a positive. Like I like, there's a part of me that likes being dulled because I've got so much anxiety going on in my brain and so much other, bad thoughts that, the pot can make those go away or be less intrusive or less loud.
Yeah, in that sense, do you see it as, it is therapeutic and it can be.
And it's a social thing with certain people. I have a handful of friends that, we might not be friends if we didn't have that. No, it sounds bad, but
it doesn't sound bad.
That's
totally
like the bond. And it's with a lot of creative people, comics and writers, friends of mine, that's became our thing. And then when we do, sure, we aren't having big conversations, or sometimes we do, but a lot of it is smoke this and get comfortable and get, get quiet, get, into where the silence doesn't bother you,
How does it impact your writing? Do you like to write one way or another?
I have a friend who uses it only to punch up things, but I always thought it's a funny way to go about it. Like he goes, when he's writing the first draft, he's not high, but when he's going back, he's able to, he thinks he loosens up. For me, there's not any rule to it. I sometimes we'll feel too high to write and then just go, okay, well, that's not the answer. We'll come back to this. But other times it totally helps, like coming up with a premise, whether it's sketch, whether it's writing something for Deadpool, whether it's, working on a feature or anything or animated, it does help. Or my stand-up. I went through a couple of, I quit pot for 3 years too. And that was a big thing for me of like, and in my head, I was like, am I going to be silly still? I'll still be able to write jokes, but am I going to find that silly place? Because my style, what I like about what I do, my own comedy, I like walking this line of dumb and smart together. And I like I feel like some of my favorite stuff I've been involved with treads that line, whether it's Sarah Silverman, Mr. Show. The things that I'm the most proud of for me are, hey, that's kind of, was that written by a smart guy or a dumb guy? You can't tell. You know what I mean? Like there's qualities to it, highbrow and lowbrow. And I like silliness, and I was a little concerned when I wasn't smoking that would I still be able to find this kind of stony silliness?
And could you?
Yeah, absolutely, because it was always there.
I think that's a really interesting point, because a lot of people are like, oh, weed makes me this or that, but it's actually, as you articulated, it's you had that thing, and maybe weed helped you slow down or access it or whatever it was, but to be able to still do that, I think is hugely important, and knowing that you can have it without that.
You know, they say if you want to find out why you use, stop using. And I'm curious if there were any other revelations you had, you know, about either what was missing or what was harder, or, I mean, I think you already probably knew it, but I'm just curious if at that stage in your life, you know, for those 3 years, if you learned anything different. I'm curious about your relationship. Like, you know.
Well, and I want to get back to that. I want to get back to maybe not being completely sober, but there was something good about those 3 years. So I don't know, but without beating myself up too much about it, it's a thing. I don't love that I feel like I use it as a crutch sometimes.
Right.
I don't love that about it. Without getting too far into like political stuff, or just everything out there, it's been hard for me to quit the last 4 years.
Yeah, it's been a hell of a year. It's been a hell of a year and a hell of a 4 years. I will own this on your behalf. And this is why I started this podcast, was because the last year has introduced anxiety into people's lives who literally never even touched it. I had people reaching out to me like, I can't sleep. I can't eat. What? Should I go to the doctor? No, you're anxious because the country's on fire. The world is literally on fire. And I think that for a lot of people, I mean, look, this is where 12-step programs are thriving this year, because those of us who resonate in the rooms of the 12 steps, which I do, we're like, oh, we got this. Like, this is what the steps were made for all the things you're powerless over. And here are the things that we do. And we go to our meetings, and you can do it from your bed now. So it's been a very interesting year. And that's literally why we started this podcast. So,
well, I appreciate you talking about it, Brian, because I think a lot of people are struggling. And if not struggling, they're questioning their use, and they're asking themselves, why am I using this? How frequently should I be using this or not? Yeah. And then to hear someone who has quit and quit for a long time, reflect on both using and not using, and sort of benefits or not benefits. And I think it's super helpful for people who may, because there's a whole other chunk of people who just use without thinking about it. And I think that has its own negative consequences.
Yeah. And I do this thing where I'll go, well, now's not the time. You can't, you know, and it just hasn't felt the time for, especially this year.
Absolutely. Yes.
I gained weight because of COVID. Like, I'm the heaviest I've ever been.
Right.
Because food is another thing. And, you know, but also, without being too on the nose, pot.
It doesn't help.
No, it doesn't.
Well, and I think that's the sort of, you know, when I have spoken to my kids even vaguely about pot, like, that's what I say when we look at, you know, when we see whatever, someone in the news like doing something powerful and amazing, or we hear about some kid who excelled in this way and donated all this money to charity. I literally, from the time they were very little, I said, do you think that person was up drinking and vomiting in a, you know, alley all night? No, mother. Do you think that person was mainlining heroin all night? No, mother. So, like, I know that it's not fair to do that, but the fact is, like, when I speak to a lot of young people, and that's what I say, the longer you can wait before starting to introduce a crutch into the way you function socially and academically, the more your brain has the ability to learn those other skills, and the more your brain has the ability to adapt. And the same is true of pharmaceutical drugs, which we are peddled on the daily. The sooner you start dumping that into your system, and the sooner the doctors tell you, oh, you're having trouble with your menstrual cycle, let me put you on an antidepressant, right? The sooner we introduce that, we rob our brain and our body the ability to start navigating. And I feel the same about alcohol. Like, I'm a lot more fun after a drink. Like, I think probably 100% I'm a lot more fun. But the fact is, I'm grateful that I didn't try that at 14 and at 16, because I might have been one of those people who was a cautionary tale for other people's children.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that I waited till I was 22 for
Right.
weed too. You know, I knew kids that smoked pot, and
Yeah.
but I wasn't at that point.
I may not have made it out of high school, I think, if you had given me access to that. Brian, I think you're so delightful, and really, it's such a pleasure to talk to you, and also to know you, and to get to be one of the people who gets to hear your weird jokes and your dark jokes. And people who have your skill set have a fearlessness that I really, really envy, and I'm really grateful that I get to, I get to see that, in you, in our private off-camera moments a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Yeah, of course.
That's the longest period of time I've spoken to Brian. I mean, we've played D&D that goes for hours and hours, but that's different. We're in a group setting. That's a slow to warm up person, meaning even at the beginning of us talking, he was shy, and then he really just kind of like started going. I've never seen his stand-up. I'm a stand-up connoisseur. You may not know. I've never seen his stand-up, but when he would tell me, because I would try and socialize with him, like on the set of Big Bang, and I would say, oh, did you have a good hiatus? Or, and he would always say that he was like going these places to colleges. And I was thinking, like, he seems so shy. Like, what is that like, for him to get up on a stage? And I just really loved hearing about. I remember. I mean, his mother passed. We kind of had a D&D session right after, and very hard. He also had some like amazing killer jokes about it. Like, and I remember thinking like, wow, his mind, like he's a real master of joke craft. Anyway, I'm just really grateful that he opened up and wanted to talk to us.
I think it's important, too, to have people openly talking about using pot. It's now been decriminalized and legalized both for medical use and recreational use in many states. And people are having new relationships with this substance.
Also, like, huge shout out to him for it's the elephant in the room. I can't tell you how many people, like, when I've spoken to about like what's their year been like it comes out in like the 8th or 9th time you check in with them, like, I've been smoking so much weed, I don't think it's healthy. Or, oh, I've just taken to drinking starting at 4 p.m. And like,
not that he said that, but
no. I'm saying though, like,
yeah.
I've been hearing this from people that I know, because it's kind of like people are bored and it numbs you out. Like, who wants to think about what's going on in the world all the time? I have tremendous respect for people who can operate at that level of like people who work in newsrooms. Like, I'm sure that there are some who smoke pot and drink, but like, they live and breathe like this world all the time. They've got something I don't. I can't do that all the time. So whether you're filling it with alcohol, with pot, with food, with work, that was most of my life really as an adult, is like I would just work myself into the ground. Like, oh, I'd work a 10-hour day, I'd come home and then I'd work another 6 hours. Like, that was completely... That's how they say emotions can't hit a moving target. Like, I just like kept moving, kept bouncing, like do this, do that, drink that. So, yeah, he touched on what a lot of people are experiencing, which is everybody's going to be impacted by things differently. I mean, that's like the dumbest thing I've ever said. But I remember there was a friend of mine when Trump got elected in the first place. She really went down the rabbit hole of her mental health existence. She was put on medication. I mean, she was having active panic attacks, like really, really had a breakdown. And I remember at the time, I don't know if I owe her an amends for something that I just thought and didn't tell anyone else. At the time, I was like, seriously? Like, come on.
Maybe she had the foresight to know what was about to happen to us.
Okay, so that's the shamanic option. Maybe she had the foresight, but maybe it was also just that, like, that's where she was at in terms of her emotional capacity, her emotional stability. And I can't fault that, because at any given time in my life, let's just pretend this had happened the year after I got divorced. If Trump had been elected the year after I got divorced,
What would have happened?
I would have given up custody of my children and either gone to live at the Tassajara Zen Mountain Center above San Francisco, or you would have had to put me in a hospital, because the amount of emotional information that I would have been trying to process with my God-given genetics and with everything about my functioning, I don't think I would have been able to handle it. I'm completely serious right now. Also, if I was a kid right now and you put me in a Zoom class, F that, I would have found ways to misbehave if I didn't have them before.
I'm interested about this idea of too much emotional information. And he talked about marijuana as a numbing agent. And he said, well, sometimes I don't want that information. And he was describing that some of that information is anxiety, but I'm tying that back to your story of going to live on a mountaintop. Like, you were experiencing an enormous amount of information at that time. So I'm wondering about the connection between information, like the amount of information that we're processing, and
everybody's brain has a different capacity also.
But I'm also wondering about capacity of our individual brains to process amounts of information, but also maybe some of us just have more information that's coming.
Well, I mean,
like more extra sensory information.
Okay, yes. The first level is that there's brain variability. Okay. And then the second level, which we talk about a lot, is there's environmental variability. You know, you take two brains and you put one in an abusive, deprivation, neglectful abandonment situation, and that's going to do something different, to the identical brain as if you were in an immersive, enriching, nurturing, loving environment.
Do those exist?
I've heard about them in storybooks. Okay, so there's those levels. And then we get to, I'll say this first, then we get to the level of the variability in certain people's brains is such that they are receiving more information. And that's not to say that, like, they're operating on a different plane of existence, but
I'm pretty sure that's what we're saying.
I think different plane of existence sounds too out there to people, but there's a scientific explanation for a different plane of existence. And what it is that there are people who hear differently, and there are people that experience physical sensation differently. So for those people, oftentimes things like information that has high stressful emotional content does affect them differently. So my thing, stories about, like, I hate to say this, like animals being tortured is like the most painful thing. And I fixate on those. This is one of the reasons I had to take a break from news, because there's something in me that, like, I'm fascinated with the set of emotions that I feel when that empathy and that rage and that terror gets kicked up, but it becomes a compulsive act for me of pursuing that story and following it through and find it can become, it's overwhelming. And it's almost the only way to understand it is to immerse myself in it. And the other kind of level of that is that there are people, and this is more of a spiritual concept, there are people who feel differently. And so they're going to get flooded sooner. And the people who typically have that connection with the world historically were healers and shamans, because you would take the people in any given village, and you've got one who, when you feel something, they feel something. They're empaths. And that's not fantasy unicorn fairy dust. Like, that's a true thing. And often those people are demonized, burned at the stake, pathologized, called hysterical. And the fact is, there are different capacities, yes, that we're born with, and you can foster those and you can make them grow. So what Brian was talking about was also that he may have a different sensitivity, and he is seeking resources to manage those. I mean, we all are. We all are.
Back to your comment about the animals and the feeling that you get when you read a story about animal cruelty.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that, A, it is you tapping into some childhood or rage or unprocessed anger, resentment that you then transpose onto that situation. B, some sort of empathic experience where you tap into the rage and cruelty of humanity, because as much as we are loving and kind, there's also that aspect of humanity that's difficult. B, some combination of those two, or none of the above.
The example that I gave is a combination of personal feelings, which is really kind of the genetics plus environment. It's who I am. I mean, it's who all of us are. I'm just using myself as an example. That's who I am. Intuitively, mostly I feel that it's more the empath in me. And yeah, I do think that there is another option where I do feel connected, just as a person with a spiritual practice and a scientific practice of understanding and wanting to understand the molecules of our existence. And I do feel both a communal joy and a communal suffering. Like I have an awareness of that. But again, what that translates to is this world is not really equipped for me to kind of function like that on a daily basis. Because if we fully grasp the terror of the darkness of humanity, like none of us would want to get up. We wouldn't get up. So there's like a suspension of disbelief that we all have to go through. That's what Brian is talking about. That was his uncomfortableness. And like that was the shifting in his seat, because we force ourselves to learn how to live in an unlivable world in many ways. And it can be very, very crippling. I'm so, really uplifted, by getting to talk to him, because also I just love a story of someone who had to work so hard to find their way, like losing your dad. I mean, I chose not to go there. I actually don't know the story, but when he said his dad died, before he was even 25, and just him going up and thinking of like little Brian, I think he a little redhead, like little Brian going to play therapy, and just like how much his mother then had to take on. I mean, that's an unbelievable template, and then to add to that, just feeling awkward or being different or being a nerd or like not knowing that you had an eye condition, like just those little things. But then also that is, his growth was a huge catalyst for a whole other kind of growth. And so just like, I just love that path, and I'm so grateful that he took us, on it with him. So.
He really was very generous with his story, and
yeah,
I think
adore him.
Ask Mayim anything. Yeah.
Anonymous from Studio City asks, is there a right amount of marijuana?
Like an okay amount?
Like, I assume I'm reading between the lines here because this is a short one and we wanted to choose something that related to our general subject matter here. But I think the question is, what's too much?
Right.
And is there like an appropriate amount? And you're going to say, it really depends on the individual.
You know what?
And it's a combination between our nurture and our nature.
Let's ask the non-neuroscientist. Jonathan, is there an answer to this? Would you feel different if you knew this question was being asked by a teenager?
I support and totally agree that the brain should have as much time with being its own natural self as possible. Lots of people say that the brain doesn't fully finish developing until 25. I don't know if you
There's
agree
some
with
frontal lobe and impulse control that we definitely, if you've been to a frat party, you've seen that in action.
So having been a teenage male and an early 20s male and now a almost 42-year-old male, I would say that my brain has changed drastically in those years. My ability to have impulse control, my ability not to feel the urgency of situations and like the need to fix things immediately. My executive functioning still isn't great. My planning, I'm more the creative side, so
different episode.
Different problem. So I would say that we should give ourselves as much time.
Okay, great. So that being said, is there an okay amount?
Probably less.
Does it depend on the person?
Probably less is more.
Less is more. So you can have a glass of wine a day. Can you have a joint a day?
I guess the question would be,
the same?
what is a joint? Are we talking about like, a glass of wine is however many ounces? Is is a joint a gram? I would say a gram for an individual. Like, and I guess there's also tolerance, and sort of how that tolerance builds is a scientific question I'm curious about.
You know, I think that the simple answer, and this question is being asked by a young person, the simple answer is, I do believe that there is an amount of marijuana that can be consumed in a social fashion, the way some people will drink socially. However, we have a culture that really favors the normalization of pot use. And the fact is, it is a very, very powerful social lubricant in a way that alcohol isn't. They do not function the same. So it's hard to give a comparison of like, this is the right amount or this is an okay amount of pot, because so much of our reaction with pot is not predictable the way wine will be. So the example I give my kids is, if you take 100 people and within 50 pounds of each other, you take 100 people, and you give them each 2 beers, you can probably have a pretty predictable bell curve of what's going to happen. And it's probably going to be skewed even one way. It's not even going to be nobody cares about parabolas right now. But anyway, you can have a pretty predictable trajectory for what their behavior is going to be like, how it changes, what their recovery will be like, and what they'll look like tomorrow. Okay? If you up that to 4 beers, you're probably also going to have a pretty predictable trajectory. The thing with pot is it acts differently than alcohol does, and especially with young people. Pot's the kind of thing that one hit can land you in a panic attack. One hit. If you're susceptible to panic attacks, you can be around other people smoking and you'll get a panic attack and still ask people to take you to the hospital, and then they're all stoned and no one can take you. I've never been in that situation. What? So we have a lot less predictability with pot, which makes it harder to determine what's an okay amount, like an okay amount from a teenage perspective. In addition, the ability to feel numbed out and at ease, I believe, is a lot more attractive because there's a lot less side effects than going on a bender with alcohol. So the ease with which you feel you can be at ease is a lot more accessible, especially for young people. And the fact is, it's not like smoking a cigarette and it's not like having a glass of wine. So that being said, you know, at the point I'm at in my life, I literally don't even have 1 drink a week. Like, it's just, it's not worth it anymore. It disrupts my sleep. I'm not interested. There were times when I drank. There were times when I drank too much, you know, like too much for my comfort, my lifestyle. And I think that you will find people who are like that with pot, or like, oh, I'll do it once in a while. A thing to look out for is if you are having a life that you otherwise wouldn't have without pot, that's probably too much. Meaning, if you find that the things you want to do are best done when you're stoned, that's too much, because you're denying yourself the ability to learn the things that we need to learn to be mature, responsible adults. You know, meaning, let me just give an example. Like, oh, I have to be stoned to go on a date. I have to be stoned to go to class. I have to be stoned to go to sleep. I have to be stoned to go for a job interview. Like, these are things that are indicating that you're using it medicinally.
So maybe instead of what is too much, we're talking about, because I interpreted too much as the amount of use or like the quantity of use, but really what we're talking about is the frequency of use.
Yeah, I mean, the fact it's very hard to talk amounts with pot, like I said, because one hit, depending on your chemistry, depending on what your day was like, depending on what anxiety you've experienced, it is a hallucinogenic class of drug. It does some strong things. And yes, there are different strains and there are different things and blah, blah, blah. But the fact is, it has a lot less predictability. And the pot that was available to us when I was young is very, very different than the pot that is available now. And that's also something that nobody likes at that answer.
So Anonymous from Studio City, if you don't like the answer to that, hit us up again and we'll do a redo.
Ask us next year. Just don't smoke for another year. We'll talk about it then. If you enjoyed this conversation, you might enjoy going to our website, bialikbreakdown.com. That's BIALIK. Breakdown.com. We'll put up some interesting, there are some interesting articles there.
And we'll link to Brian's stand-up so Mayim
Oh
can
my
see
gosh. I love anything, Brian. I do. Really need to get into that. So, all right, from my breakdown to the one I hope you never have, I'll see you next time.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two. One fiction, and now she's gonna break down